My name's Wayne Cooper, and I'm just here today to tell you a little bit about my story and how God led me in my life. From the beginning, I'm from Sydney originally. I was born in Sydney, raised in Sydney. I grew up in a non-Christian home. Unfortunately, at a very early age, my mother contracted cancer. I was only 4 years old, and she fought with cancer for 4 years, and unfortunately she passed away when I was 8. It's a very sad time in my life, in my father's life. Consequently, we went to live with my grandparents. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and I can remember the bitter arguments between my grandmother and my grandfather, and so not a happy home. And unfortunately, my father sort of went into depression after the loss of my mother. The way he dealt with the pain was to become basically a workaholic. So basically, I was raised by my grandparents. In fact, when I was 12, my dad remarried. We moved back to our family home, which was at North Epping. So I moved back in with my stepmother and my dad, and I didn't particularly get along well with my stepmother as a teenager. I think I was a pretty unhappy, probably becoming rebellious young teenager. I started looking for happiness in all the wrong places, unfortunately. Drinking, alcohol, smoking, drugs. My grades started to plummet, and my parents, my dad and my stepmom, had moved to Port Macquarie, so at 16 years of age I was out of the home, sort of in a share situation, living with some mates and what have you. And I was pretty good with my hands. I could use my hands, and I was good at metalwork. So I ended up getting an apprenticeship as a fitter and turner, looking for something that I just didn't have. Where I was doing my apprenticeship was an engineering company here in Sydney, and there was about 5 of us first-year apprentices. Lunchtimes we used to play cards and smoke, but all except for one of the other guys who was the first-year apprentice. His name was Ian Robbins. Anyway, one day I approached Ian and I said, "Ian, there's something different about you. What is it? You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't swear, and yet you're really happy." And anyway, he shared with me how he had become a Christian, and he gave me a Bible, and it had an impression upon me. I guess that experience with Ian to plant a seed. But the pull of the world was still very strong, and I remember one night, one Saturday night, early hours of the morning, and it was a beautiful, clear, starlit night, and I remember feeling miserable and unhappy, and just didn't have meaning in my life. I didn't have true friends. Looked up to the stars and I said, "God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. I want to know you if you're real." So right towards the end of my apprenticeship, I thought, all right, when I finish my apprenticeship, I've been hearing about hippie communes, particularly up around Nimbin, and I thought, well, maybe they've got the answer, the alternative lifestyle. I thought, well, maybe this is the answer. So I packed up my belongings on my back and a backpack, and I thought, right, I'm going to hitchhike up to northern New South Wales to Nimbin hippie commune. I'd known people who'd done it, had gone up there, and it was a hot summer's day, and he dropped me off at Brooklyn. He lived in Brooklyn. Always just had no problems getting a lift. But this particular day, no one would pick me up. And literally I was standing there for hours, and the sun was beating down to me, and I thought, what is going on here? Why won't someone pick me up? So I was really hot, I was sweating, and I thought, right, I'll go down and go under the bridge and get some shade under the old Hawkesbury Bridge and have a cigarette down by the water. That's exactly what I did. So I walked down, climbed down next to the water there, sitting on the water's edge, having a cigarette. And I looked down into the sand on the riverbank, and there was a magazine, and it was half buried in the sand. And so I got my curiosity, so I picked it up and brushed it off. Anyway, the magazine was open to an article. It wasn't closed properly at its cover. It was open to an article. I started reading, and it was about this young guy who, like me, who was looking for meaning in life and looking for security and looking for peace and happiness. And he tried drugs and rock and roll. He'd been up to Nimbin, joined hippie communes, and nothing that he found in there had satisfied his needs, and he'd given his life to Christ. And I remember he was studying to be a minister at a place called Avondale College. I'd never heard of Avondale College before. Anyway, I read this article and I felt really strongly impressed to go back home, that where I was going wasn't going to give me what I was looking for. I believe now it was the voice of God speaking to me at that time. And of course, I looked at the cover of the magazine, and it was a Signs of the Times magazine. I don't know how it had got down there by the riverbank, whether someone had thrown it out the car window as they're driving past, but God had it there just for me to read on that particular day. I'll head back home. I put my finger out to get a lift home. The first car that came across picked me up. I remember I've been waiting hours to go the other way. The first car picked me up and went right out of his way and dropped me right to my door. And I thought, what is going on here? I started to realise, have a reality in my mind that God was working in my life, and I didn't know what was going to happen yet. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I was living with a friend of mine, John. He was going to move to the Northern Territory and work on a cattle station way up in the Northern Territory. So consequently, I was thinking, okay, where am I going to go? What am I going to do now? John, my flatmate, was going with a friend of his who did his apprenticeship. His name was Wayne also. And Wayne came over with a friend of his, Dennis, to our flat. And anyway, they were getting ready and making plans to do their thing. So I started talking to Dennis, and Dennis said, he said to me, Wayne, what are you going to do when John goes? Have you got somewhere to live? And I said, no, I'm at a loss. I don't know where I'm going to go. He said, well, look, I'm living in a 2-bedroom half house at Pennant Hills. You're welcome to come and live with me because I'm looking for someone. So I started talking to Dennis, and that's what I did. I actually moved in with Dennis. So I started to get to know Dennis, and Dennis didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He was happy. He was just a really nice guy, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? So I started asking Dennis about himself. Anyway, it turns out that Dennis was a Seventh-day Adventist. And he said that, so I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this magazine that I've read, Signs of the Times, the Signs magazine, that was from the Seventh-day Adventist, and now I'm meeting a Seventh-day Adventist. What is going on here? Is this a real coincidence, or is it? And so I started getting to know Dennis, and then I started really questioning. I became very, very inquisitive about the Bible, studies leading up to baptism, and eventually I decided that I wanted to become a Seventh-day Adventist and be baptised into the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the old Castle Hill Church in 1978. So we're talking about ancient history here. We're talking 45 years ago now, but that God basically picked me up out of the world and showed me where He wanted me to be, and He brought meaning and fulfillment and security, all those things that I've been looking for into my life. And I praise God for the way He used the Signs of the Times that day back under the bridge on the Hawkesbury River. And I know that Signs was an integral part, my first introduction to Adventism. I know that God is still using the Signs magazines in people's lives today.